The sun was setting over Newport Harbor, painting the yachts in shades of gold and arrogance. My father, Edward, didn't even look up from his oyster plate when he destroyed my future. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and said, simply, "We have reallocated your grandmother's legacy fund to Kyle's wedding catering. It is $85,000. Indigo. It is necessary to protect the family brand." He didn't ask. He didn't apologize. He just stole the money meant for my design firm to pay for my brother's party, dismissing my entire career as a cute little hobby. The cruelty wasn't in the theft. It was in how bored he looked while doing it. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't flip the table. I didn't scream. I sat there and watched the condensation slide down my glass of iced tea, calculating the return on investment of my entire life. My father talked about the family brand like it was something holy, something fragile that needed constant sacrifices to survive. But I knew the truth. I was the brand. For 5 years, Edward's estate management firm had been winning awards for visionary landscape architecture. That vision didn't come from him. It came from me, sitting in a windowless back office until 3 a.m, drafting blueprints for terraced gardens and sustainable irrigation systems that he couldn't even pronounce. I was the one who turned mud into masterpieces for the wealthiest families in Rhode Island. I was paid $45,000 a year, a junior salary for a senior partner's workload, while he took the credit. The handshakes. And the profits. And then there was Kyle. My brother sat across from me, picking at a lobster tail he hadn't paid for, wearing a watch that cost more than my car. The golden child. The prodigy. The future of the dynasty. In reality, Kyle was a failed real estate agent who hadn't sold a single property in 2 years. He drove a leased Porsche he couldn't afford and called himself a developer because he once sketched a condo on a napkin. The $85,000 my grandmother left me wasn't just money. It was my exit strategy. It was the seed capital for my own firm. The down payment on my freedom. And now, my father was liquidating my freedom to pay for Kyle's open bar. I looked at Lucas sitting beside me. He was wearing his favorite flannel shirt, the one with the fraying cuffs. My parents treated him like a piece of discount furniture they were embarrassed to have on their deck. They saw a 30-year-old man who drove an old truck and spent his days in a lab. And they assumed he was a failure. They didn't see the way his mind worked. The quiet intensity. The way he built things from nothing. To them, he was just another bad investment I had made. A broke researcher dragging down their market value. My mother, Cynthia, smiled at me. That tight, practiced smile she wore when she was trying to sell a lie. "It's an investment. Indigo," she said, echoing my father. "Kyle's wedding will bring in new clients. It secures the legacy. You understand, don't you? You've always been the sensible one." The sensible one. That was their code word for the appliance. I realized then, with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins, that they didn't love me. Not in the way parents love children. They loved my utility. I was a toaster that produced designs. I was a generator that produced stability. And when you need parts to fix the shiny, broken sports car in the driveway, you strip the generator. You don't ask the generator for permission. You just take what you need. I looked at the check my father had already signed to the caterer using my trust fund account number. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt the cold, hard click of a lock snapping shut. I tried to use logic. It was a mistake. You cannot use logic to dismantle a delusion that was built to protect an ego. That account is in my name. Edward, I said, keeping my voice flat and unbothered. It is not a family slush fund. It is a legal trust. You moving that money isn't a reallocation. It is wire fraud. Cynthia let out a long, suffering sigh. The kind she reserved for undercooked risottos and disobedient daughters. You are being so difficult. Indigo. This is the future of the dynasty we are talking about. Kyle needs this start. Why must you be so selfish? Selfish. The word hung in the humid air between us. That was the moment the equation finally solved itself in my head. I looked at my mother. Really looked at her. And I realized the truth. My parents didn't hate me. Hate would imply they had feelings toward me at all. To them, I wasn't a person. I was an appliance. I was a high-end, reliable generator. You don't thank a generator for keeping the lights on, you expect it. You don't ask a generator about its dreams. You just demand it works. And when an appliance stops working, when the toaster refuses to pop, or the generator refuses to hum, you don't nurture it. You kick it. You shake it. You force it back into compliance because its only value is its function. That was what this dinner was. It wasn't a negotiation. It was percussive maintenance. They were kicking the machine to make it spit out the cash. You are hurting your brother, Cynthia whispered, her eyes wide and wet. A performance worthy of a daytime Emmy. He is under so much pressure. I am not hurting him, I said. I am simply refusing to finance his delusions. Edward slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. Enough. You will sign the release forms tomorrow. I am the trustee, and I say what is best for this family. And you. He turned his glare toward Lucas, his lip curling in disgust. You will stop dragging her down with your mediocrity. If you cannot provide for her, get out of the way so she can find someone who can. Lucas stopped eating. He didn't flinch. He didn't look angry. He carefully placed his fork down on the white china, wiped his mouth, and reached into the pocket of his worn flannel shirt. Mediocrity, Lucas repeated, testing the word like it was a cheap wine. That is an interesting word, Edward. It's the only word that fits. Edward sneered. You drive a truck that belongs in a junkyard. You play around in a lab while the adults do business. You are a liability. Lucas didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply pulled out his phone, tapped the screen twice, and slid it across the tablecloth until it rested directly in front of my father. Read the headline, Lucas said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Edward looked down, annoyed, ready to dismiss whatever trivial article Lucas was showing him. Then he froze. His eyes locked onto the screen. He squinted, leaning in, his mouth opening slightly. Cynthia leaned over his shoulder, her brow furrowed. I knew what it said. I had seen the draft press release 3 days ago. Biotech giant Chimera acquires Lucas Thorne's proprietary gene editing patent for $1.6 billion. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. The sounds of the yacht club, the clinking glasses. The distant laughter seemed to vanish. Edward stared at the phone. Then, at Lucas. Then back at the phone. He was doing the math. He was realizing that the man in the flannel shirt, the man he had just called a liability, could buy this entire yacht club, burn it down, and rebuild it without checking his bank balance. Lucas leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. I wanted to see if you respected Indigo for who she was. or if you only valued what you could take from her. He said, "You gave us your answer." Edward looked up. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a naked, trembling greed. "Lucas," he stammered, his voice cracking. We didn't know. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because," Lucas said, "I wasn't the one being tested." The speed of the pivot was almost impressive. It was like watching a snake shed its skin in real time. Edward let out a boisterous, forced laugh, clapping his hands together as if Lucas had just told a witty joke at a cocktail party. "Well played." He beamed, his eyes scanning Lucas's face, searching for a way in. "You got us. A test of character, right? I always told Cynthia you were a sharp one. You have to be. In this market. We should talk about your portfolio management. My firm handles high net worth individuals exclusively. And we could." "Edward," Lucas said, cutting him off without raising his voice. "I have advisors. They are competent." Cynthia jumped in, her voice high and breathless, desperate to salvage the wreckage. She reached across the table, trying to take my hand. But I pulled it back before she could make contact. "Indigo. Sweetheart. Don't look like that. We were just stressed. Of course. We aren't taking your grandmother's money. We'll find another way to cover the catering. Consider the $85,000 returned. We're a family. We help each other." She thought she was offering me a truce. She thought that by giving back the money she had just stolen, we would go back to the status quo, me as the silent worker, them as the benevolent rulers. But the problem with breaking a foundation is that you cannot just paint over the cracks. The structural integrity is gone. "I don't want the money back," I said. Kyle looked up, hopeful for the first time in 10 minutes. "You don't?" "No," I said. "Because the money isn't the problem. The problem is why you needed it so badly. Why you needed exactly $85,000 by Monday morning." I reached into my bag. I didn't pull out a compact or a phone. I pulled out a thick manila folder. It hit the table with a heavy, final thud. It wasn't wedding plans. It was a forensic audit. "I handle the logistics for your firm." "Edward," I said, opening the folder. "I see the vendor contracts. I see the invoices. And last week, I saw something that didn't make sense. So I dug deeper." I slid a document toward Kyle. He didn't touch it. He stared at it like it was a loaded gun. "That is a subpoena," I said, "from the Securities and Exchange Commission." The color drained from Cynthia's face. "What are you talking about?" "Kyle isn't a developer," I said, my voice steady, cold, factual. "He is a fraud. The condo project in downtown Providence? It doesn't exist. He solicited investments from 3 of your biggest landscaping clients, promising them a 20% return. He took their money, $200,000, and he spent it." I turned the page, revealing a bank statement highlighted in neon yellow. Leased Porsche. First-class trips to Tulum. VIP tables in Miami. He spent their investment capital on a lifestyle he couldn't afford to impress people who don't care about him. "That's a lie," Kyle whispered, but his voice was thin, shaking. "It is a ledger," I corrected. "And now, those clients want their money back. They threatened to go to the police if they weren't paid by next week. That is what the wedding is. Isn't it? It's not a celebration. It's a laundering operation. You were going to use my inheritance and the cash gifts from the guests to pay off Kyle's victims before the indictment came down. I looked at my father. He wasn't the powerful patriarch anymore. He was a man watching his legacy burn to the ground. You weren't investing in the family brand, I said. You were paying hush money. Edward looked at the subpoena on the table. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look small. He wasn't the Titan of Newport anymore. He was just a man in a blazer he could no longer afford, staring at the evidence of his own ruin. You. He struggled to find his voice, his face turning a mottled, sickly gray. You can't show this to anyone. If the board sees this, if the investors see this, the firm is finished. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. Cynthia grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Indigo, you have to listen. We can fix this. We can take a loan against the estate. We just need time. You can't destroy your brother's life over a mistake. He's family. He isn't family, I said, pulling my arm away. He is a liability. And you didn't ask me for a loan to fix a mistake. You stole my inheritance to cover up a crime. I picked up my phone. I didn't unlock it. I just held it up so they could see the time. You are worried about the board seeing this, I said. But you are operating on a delay. I sent the full forensic audit, including the unauthorized transfer attempts from my trust, to the Oversight Committee at 5 o'clock this evening. Edward made a sound I will never forget, a wet, choked gasp, like a drowning man realizing the life raft was empty. They have already frozen the accounts. Edward, I said, you can't pay the settlement. You can't pay the caterer. You can't even pay for this dinner. Kyle put his head in his hands and began to sob. It wasn't the cry of a remorseful man. It was the tantrum of a child who had finally been told no. Lucas stood up. He buttoned his flannel shirt, looking more dignified in his work clothes than my family did in their silk and linen. He extended his hand to me. Are we done? He asked. Yes, I said. We're done. We walked out of the dining room. We didn't look back. I didn't need to see them to know what was happening. I could feel the silence of the room, the stares of the other patrons, the weight of the Clark dynasty collapsing under the gravity of its own lies. The valet brought Lucas's truck around. It was old, and it rattled when it idled. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. As we drove over the bridge, leaving Newport in the rearview mirror, I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. I felt the clean, sharp relief of amputation. The limb was gone, but the poison was gone with it. 1 year later, I sat on the porch of our farmhouse, watching the mist roll over the hills. I had started my own design firm, under my own name. No and Associates. Just me. I worked with clients who respected my time and paid my invoices. Lucas came out with 2 mugs of coffee. We didn't talk about them often. But sometimes, like today, when the holidays approached, the ghost of obligation would try to settle in. I knew what their life looked like now. I heard through the grapevine that the house in Newport was sold at auction. Edward was forcing himself into semi-retirement to avoid a lawsuit from his partners. Kyle was awaiting trial, living in a rental apartment my mother paid for by selling her jewelry. I imagined them sitting at a table this Thanksgiving. The silver would be polished. The napkins would be linen. But the air would be thick with blame. They would stare at the empty chair where I used to sit, the chair where the fixer, the generator, the appliance used to be, and they wouldn't miss me. They would miss the way I made their lives work. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot and bitter and perfect. My mother had sent a letter last week. No return address. But I knew her handwriting. I didn't open it. I didn't burn it. I just dropped it into the recycling bin between a flyer for a pizza place and a catalog for garden tools. Silence is not a punishment. It is a boundary. It is the loudest scream you can make. It says, I am no longer available to be consumed. If you've ever had to choose between your family and your peace, tell me your story in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away.